Thank you everybody for joining us today in our webinar series. Today we're going to present the topic about from stress to success, mastering contract cost modifications, turning modifications into fair and equitable outcomes. The webinar will be presented by Agnes Jackal. Agnes is a seasoned procurement advisor with over 25 years of experience in contract administration and cost auditing. A chartered professional accountant, she's gained deep insight through audits that well-structured contracts are essential for successful outcomes and strong financial performance. With that said, I will hand over, to Agnes to um, give her presentation.
Thank you, Emmanuel. My name is Agnes Jackal, for Emmanuel's for future reference. And today I'm excited to share a practical approach that can transform one of the most stressful parts of contract management work. Most of us see modifications as a necessary evil, full of scope creep, tough negotiations, compliance headaches, and mountains of paperwork. But what if every modification could become a genuine, fair, and equitable outcome, with both parties working from the same objective, competitively proven data? Today, we're going to flip that script. We'll focus on award-based modifications, anchoring every change to the contractor's original competitive bid data that you already have or should have. This approach promotes fairness by using objective, competitively proven data. By the end of this session, you will leave with a new mindset and a simple 3-step framework. Let's turn burden into opportunity. Welcome to From Stress to Success. Let's be honest for a moment. Why do contract modifications cause so much stress? In service contracts, modifications are frequent and often create schedule slips and budget pressure. Ironically, a contract with 0 modifications may not be well managed. It may simply be avoiding necessary changes. How many of these pain points sound familiar? Uncontrolled scope creep that balloons costs and delays schedules. Difficulty proving cost reasonableness during reviews. Adversarial negotiations where both sides dig in. High compliance and audit risks. Valuable time lost chasing documentation instead of delivering real project results. These challenges are very real, but they are not inevitable. Here's the key mindset shift. Stop treating modifications as post-award guesswork and start treating them as award-based modifications. On your left is the reactive way, starting from scratch every time. On the right is the award-based way, grounded in the contractor's original competitive bid. Why does this work so well? Because that bid was competitively resourced, costed, and priced in a real market. It reflects the contractor's own risk allocation, assumptions, and contingencies. It gives us an objective, fair benchmark instead of negotiating in the dark, ensuring fair and reasonable pricing for both parties. As noted, the competitive bid you already have is your strongest negotiating asset. When we adopt award-based modifications, we gain possibly faster approvals with defensible pricing, reduced audit and compliance risk, better risk mitigation using the contractor's own assumptions, opportunities to optimize scope when there's a change in requirements, and more efficient negotiations using shared objective data. This is how we move from stress to success in contracting. So what is the secret weapon? It's something you should already have access to. the contractor's original bid package. Most of the time, it is filed away after award and never looked at again. That's like buying a high-performance tool and leaving it in the box. Today, we're going to open that box and put it to work. At the time of bidding, we need the right information in the right format. We want more than standalone pricing. We want resources linked to requirements, so when we make a change to a requirement, it's easy to identify the change in resources. We want costs linked to resources, such that a change in resources is what drives a change in costs. And then we want pricing linked to costs, such that a change in costs is what drives a change in price, regardless of whether the pricing is firm lot or unit pricing. Basis of estimate narratives at the resource and cost level to better understand the impact of a change in a requirement. When we capture this data properly upfront, every future modification becomes dramatically easier. You can use this bid data in 3 powerful ways. One is to validate reasonableness by comparing the modification proposal directly against original bid information. You can identify leverage by spotting inconsistencies or existing resources or costs that already cover the change. Create equitable solutions by proposing scope trades and adjustments through efficient negotiations based on the same proven bid information. This is where we stop being reactive and start being truly strategic. What is the 3-step framework? Step 1 is to address the linkage between requirements and resources. You can consider the contractor's basis of estimate at the resource level to help identify applicable resource changes based on the changed requirement. Step 2 is managing that linkage between the resources and the costs. Consider the contractor's basis of estimate at the cost level to help support cost changes based on the changed resources. And then the step 3 linkage to link up price based on the cost change with ideally any overheads that can be directly costed are detailed within the other costs. So when it comes to an overhead rate, it represents only corporate allocation. Let's look at an example for a vehicle maintenance contract. The contract consists of several requirements to maintain several different types of vehicles. We have a change in one of those requirements. Tire rotation needs to be added to the list of preventive maintenance services. Once we understand the change in the requirement, we work to step 1 to identify any changes in resources due to a change in the requirement. The first piece of information, ideally that should be in a bid, is the direct level of effort by job title for each requirement. Let's work through the detail that should have been included in the bid, in addition to basis of estimate narratives, and use it to determine the pricing modification using the 3-step process, looking at impact of the modification on labor first. With this information, for the direct level of effort in our example, the contractor's bid identifies that it would require 2 hours of effort per vehicle per quarter for an automotive technician. And with the fleet of 50 vehicles, that effort would total 400 hours per year. Knowing that information and that we now have to add tire rotation as the modification, what would we see as the impact on that direct level of effort? Working with the contractor, maybe doing some research on our own or discussion with a technical authority, we might come up with that it's going to take an additional 30 minutes per quarter per vehicle to achieve the new changed requirement to include tire rotation. If we extend that math, an additional 30 minutes per vehicle per quarter would add up to an additional 100 hours of direct level of effort per year for that same job title of automotive technician. As it would appear that there would not need to be any other type of job title added just because we're adding in tire rotation to the preventive maintenance. Once we know the change in the direct level of effort, we can look at, well, what is the actual change, or what does the change look like on the overall staffing solution? So if we have, in this example, the contractor solution was to provide 4 automotive technicians, each with 2,090 paid hours per year, which included 10 hours of overtime, 1,850 productive hours per year. So that's taking the paid hours and taking out anything for vacation, paid time off. And then we also have a total of 1,700 total direct level of effort to address all requirements in the contract. So the only one we're looking at that has a change is the one for preventive maintenance, but there's many other requirements in the contract for which those same automotive technicians are fulfilling the requirement. And if we add all those hours up, it works out to about 1,700 hours of direct level of effort for each of those 4 technicians. So we've determined from the first part that it's going to take about an additional 100 hours per year to add in the tire rotation. If we're only adding in 100 hours of effort per year, would it be reasonable to have to hire a 5th employee? It doesn't seem justified. 100 hours spread across 4 employees is only 25 additional hours per employee. Could this additional time be absorbed within existing capacity, say through overtime? Bid overtime was only an average of 10 hours per year per employee, so this change could result in 35 hours each, which is still a small amount.
Yeah, hi Agnes, I've got a question. Are we still looking at the slide that we are seeing now, which says example contractors bid with the 4 quadrants, or is there
Yeah.
some other information? Okay, all right.
And I have a question as well, which is it 100 hours or 400 hours?
So the original effort was 2 hours per vehicle per quarter, which totaled 400 hours per year.
Got it. Thank
not
you.
including the tire rotation. When we add in the tire rotation requirement, or add tire rotation to the requirement, and we estimate that, well, it's going to be 30 minutes per vehicle per quarter, that adds another 100 hours to the 400 hours of effort. So if we conclude at this point, the labor portion impact may be an additional 100 hours for the automotive technicians. Potentially that could be addressed through an overtime solution as opposed to adding more bodies to the solution. Continuing with the change to labor resources, there are likely management and supervisory positions that are not directly involved with the requirement, but are there to support those positions with direct level of effort. If we're working with just adding overtime as the solution to address the modification, does there need to be any change to these supervisory or management positions? Probably, again, difficult to justify any change if we're not adding any employees to the solution. So far, we've only talked about the additional hours, but what would be the cost change then associated with those additional hours given the bid data? So in the bottom right box, we have the labor detail, cost detail that was provided for the automotive technicians, an hourly wage rate of $35, an overtime premium of 50%. Statutory benefits as a percentage of wages is 13%, and there's a company benefit package that's an annual cost of $4,000 per employee. Now, if we're looking at adding 100 hours of overtime, is there any reason why that 100 hours of overtime shouldn't be costed at the $35 hourly wage, plus the 50% overtime premium, plus the 13% of statutory benefits, and without consideration for the company benefit package, since it's a cost per employee and we're not looking at adding any employees? So we're using the contractor's bid data, working through that to effectively come up with a cost for the labor change, where that labor change was driven by a change in the requirements. Now, there may be some other resources other than just labor included in the bid. There may be some materials. So if we're performing quarterly maintenance on the vehicles, there's probably some consumables associated with performing that maintenance. The bid was $50 per vehicle per quarter. If we're adding in tire rotation services, do we see any reason to change the material cost per vehicle? I don't know. I haven't rotated my tires myself, but I can't see having to have any additional consumables just to be able to rotate the tires. There's going to be some equipment to be able to perform all this vehicle maintenance. Ideally, the contractor has provided a detailed list of that equipment in their bid. In this example, they did provide a list. I've just broken out that list includes 4 lifts because it's very convenient to have those lifts to be able to rotate tires as well as do many of the other maintenance activities. And the equipment totals $500,000 purchase cost, which they are financing and amortizing against the contract at a cost of $125,000 per year. By adding tire rotation to the requirement, do we see any reason why there would need to be a change in any of this equipment? And if the answer is again no, then there's no cost change associated with equipment. Of course, they're probably going to need a facility to provide these services in, and they put in their bid that they're going to lease a dedicated facility at $150,000 per year. If we're adding tire rotation in, does that impact what's being provided as a facility? The answer is likely no. There may be some other resources or costs that they detail as part of their bid, ideally detailed, especially anything that would normally seem like an overhead item. If it can be detailed specific to the contract, then it should be included in the bid as a detail as opposed to just working out through a markup percentage. Because then this allows us to look at that and determine whether or not there needs to be any adjustment to it to be able to support the modification. Okay, so in this example, we have an annual premium of $50,000 for comprehensive insurance. Because we're adding tire rotation to the preventive maintenance. It's already likely that as part of other requirements for doing corrective maintenance, they're already doing tire work. So unless they can support that adding tire rotation is going to impact their insurance premium, then there would be no resource or cost change with respect to their insurance. So based on the example we have, adding tire rotation, it looks like there's not going to be any change to material, equipment, facility, or any other detailed costs in this contractor solution. So once we have worked through the resource change, which was step 1, the cost associated with the change in those resources, which is step 2, we're now ready to move on to step 3, which is the change in price. At this point, is there any reason why the price change shouldn't now be equal to that cost change plus the bid, overhead, and profit? If not, then it's a matter of simply doing the math of the $35 per hour times 100 hours times the 50% overtime premium plus the 13% statutory benefit rate plus the 3% overhead and the 5% profit. And we can then arrive at the price change based on the change in resources, the change in costs. Okay. So we've now completed the 3-step process, where in step 1, we identified that the additional labor effort associated with the change requirement could be addressed through overtime and that there was no change required to any other resources. Step 2 resulted in using the bid hourly wage rate, applying overtime premium and only the statutory benefits percentage, ignoring those costs that are per employee, since we're not adding any employees. And then as already mentioned, step 3 is then a simple calculation of adding bid overhead and profit to the change in cost associated with the modification. Challenges and solutions. Of course, this approach isn't without challenges. Here are the 3 most common ones and how to handle them. First one, bid data is not in a usable format because it was submitted without any specified format, likely spread across multiple unlinked worksheets and files. Convert it once into a working template. This often reveals gaps you can fix, which leads to the next challenge, missing information. Missing information can be completed by working with a technical authority, someone who has technical expertise in the services involved, or the use of AI tools to reconstruct reasonable breakdowns or fill in gaps. Lastly, bid data is old. While it may be perceived that especially with a multi-year contract that the bid data becomes outdated, if the contractor is continuing to operate without facing bankruptcy, then the bid data is at least still overall valid, with individual differences offsetting each other. These are solvable problems, and solving them pays dividends on every future modification. So let's recap. And I can see I've gone through my slides pretty quickly, so I would appreciate comments on if I'm going too quickly. Contract modifications don't have to be stressful. Powered by the contractor's own bid data, they become a repeatable tool for creating fair and equitable outcomes while ensuring fair and reasonable pricing for all parties. You now have the simple 3-step framework. Determine the change in resources based on the changed or new requirements. Step 2, then determine the change in costs due to the change in resources. And step 3, determine the change in pricing due to the cost change. Now, this three-step process really only works if you have the bid data, the right information collected as part of the bid in the right format, or you've gone through the process of setting up that format and filling in the gaps. Please take a moment and ask yourself, what is one specific thing you will do differently on your next modification to promote greater fairness? Thank you for your time and engagement today. I'm happy to take your questions. And if no one has any questions, I don't know if there are any in the chat.
I'm
We can-
reading the chat now to see if there are any questions. Okay, no questions so far, but I have a question. Do you mind going back to your example,
The beginning of it,
the end of it?
the end of it. Am I at the
Okay,
right
maybe
place?
yeah, maybe one slide back. Um, how how does um a practitioner, develop a model the bid? What are, some tools that can be used to model the bid to be able to execute these three steps?
What are the tools that could be used?
Yes,
Okay. Um, so are you talking about the TF software?
yes.
Yes. So yes. So ASC Group has a proprietary software based in Excel that will collect all of this information either during the bid process, or if it wasn't, the TF software wasn't used during the bid process, it can always be used to basically collect the information that you do have from the contractor's proposal. Again, the software is a fill in the blank approach. So if you've filled in as much as you can from the contractor's proposal, it's likely you're going to see gaps. And then, as previously mentioned, to fill in those gaps, you can either, discuss with the technical authority or potentially use AI to fill in those gaps. Additionally, the bidder's proposal is probably going to, if it doesn't have the detail, it's at least going to have information at a higher level. And so you can use that information at a higher level to potentially reverse engineer the detail that was likely behind coming up with those higher level pieces of information. Does that answer your question, Emmanuel?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Now there's another question from Kwesi. He says this modification is when the government has agreed to the change with a change order.
So he's asking the specific mechanism, or, I mean,
Yeah, does this approach only get triggered when a change order has been approved by the government?
by the government. That's right. So generally, you're not going to proceed with a cost amendment unless, or a cost modification, unless you have some change to the requirements. And generally, the change to the requirements, at least at some level, is identified. But this process also helps to identify where a modification to requirement is maybe incomplete or ambiguous. And so by going through this structured three-step process, it might actually identify, an improvement to the change to the requirement.
Okay. Dan is asking, what was the cost of the modification?
What was the cost of the modification? I apologize, I did not do the math in advance, but if anybody does have a calculator, it's $35 per hour times 100 hours times the 50% overtime premium plus the 13% statutory benefits plus the 5% or 3% overhead and 5% profit.
If I could add to that, then, while you described the calculation, and I was quickly trying to do it on my calculator, it occurred to me that as a result of the negotiation, you would want kind of that detail that you just described in the calculation laid out almost as a fully detailed buildup of what that total value was and what each of the pieces was. And maybe it would have been great to have seen that after the example contractor's bid slide of just a sort of the calculation you just described.
Okay.
Maybe as a separate slide or at the bottom of this one or something.
Okay, yeah. I think, there is white space on this slide, so it'd be easy to add in that detail. So I guess the point, though, is regardless of what the actual calculation results in, is working through this three-step process is an objective, neutral approach to arriving at the cost. And because we're using that objective, neutral approach, that's how we get to a fair and equitable resolution to what the price modification should be.
Got it.
Can you elaborate a little bit on, what you mean by fair and equitable, right? Just for, those of us that are not procurement professionals.
Right. So fair and equitable means it's fair and equitable to both sides. Working on the example, in reference to the example that we just did, if the change in effort was something that added up to, let me go back to the slide here. This example was a change in effort of 100 hours. Again, splitting 100 hours over 4 bodies is just an additional 25 hours per year. So there wasn't really anything there to justify adding another body. Now, from the contractor side, if their bid solution was so tight that it wouldn't be possible to add those 100 hours, or if the number is something closer to like 1,500 hours, then the contractor then has the justification to support adding another body. So for it to be fair, it can go both ways. Maybe there's a solution that's going to be more favorable to the customer side, or there could be a solution that's more favorable to the contractor side. At the end of the day, we should be indifferent as to, which side it might be more beneficial to, because we're working from the data we're working from both the customer and the contractor are working from the same data. And that helps to keep, again, both sides, if they're both working from the same page, they should both be coming up with a very close or the same answer to the solution, and thus reducing the adversarial approach and, supporting the objectivity, which then leads to the fairness and equity.
Okay, thank you.
Any other hard questions? I clearly need to add more content to it. I'm surprised I went through it in 30 minutes. So, but it's good with these questions. I know where to, potentially add in more content.
I had brought up my question regarding the calculation, not for the calculation purposes, but I believe that in the contract file, any modification or amendment to the contract requires a fully detailed breakdown of what the pieces were to the price change.
That's a good point. And I think I had mentioned earlier about this is a defensible pricing approach. So
Yep.
it's likely it's going to have to, go up for approval somewhere. So if you can say, hey, we had this discussion and we agreed that this could just be an overtime solution, and here's what we have as information from the contractor's bid solution, competitively bid and awarded solution, to do the calculation. So, from there it should be hopefully an easy approval process because it's defensible.
I think even some of the pieces that, as you said, would not be affected by this could still be listed in a full build-up with NA next to them.
Right.
Right. So that we see all the pieces, including those that were driven by this change and the pieces that were not affected by it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I have a question for our audience. For those that are procurement practitioners, how do you go about contract modification today? You can type in the chat if you want, since microphones are off. I see some typing in the group chat. So let me wait for it to pop up. Okay, so Nana here has responded, in regards to contract modification, I work with my legal department to come up with an amendment. If it is modifications to a purchase order, then a change order is issued.
So
Okay,
there's a change requirement, change the requirement. Yeah, that's pretty standard. So that's just coming up with the requirement amendment. And there would still, I guess, from there have to be a price amendment or an agreement that there doesn't need to be an amendment to the price.
okay. All right. Whilst we wait for the additional, okay, so there's a response here from Kwesi, which reads, typically, the government will challenge the need for the change to make sure it's something they missed. In my line of work, that's not easy for a change order unless they missed something.
So the using the bid data is as much of an advantage to the contractor as it is to the customer side. So if they've detailed their solution and they feel that something was missed in the requirement and they weren't questioned about it, they should be able to go back. Again, if there's ambiguity in the contract, generally that's settled on the side of the contractor, not the customer. And the contractor should be able to say, it was an ambiguous requirement, and here's what we bid as our solution and our resources. And you can see from our solution and resources that we didn't bid to address whatever that was missed in the bid process.
Okay.
So if you have a situation where you have bid this much detail as part of your bid, that helps to support your case for a change order when there's clearly something that's being requested of you as a contractor that you felt was not included in the initial set of requirements.
Okay. Nana has added an additional comment saying that is correct. If there is a price change, there needs to be a price amendment. What I have noticed over time is that usually with construction contracts, there are a few change orders due to either scope change or increase in price due to the scope change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, as
Okay.
I mentioned earlier, ironically, a contract that doesn't have any amendments is probably not being well managed. They're just doing what they can to avoid having to make amendments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I'm aware there was a contract where the contract was for facilities maintenance, and one of the facilities burned to the ground and there wasn't a contract amendment.
Wow.
So, again, the contracting officer just doing what they can to avoid making the amendment. The justification was kind of, well, they're going to have to clean up the site and do all this kind of stuff. Well, wasn't really a requirement in the contract for them to clean up sites after the building burns down or whatever. And, clearly it was to the contractor's favor not to do the amendment because they didn't come after requesting the modification either. So.
Interesting. How do attendees contact you, Agnes, if they want to reach out?
So we do have our QR code here. You can scan the QR code and that'll provide you with my contact information. I'm hoping that when this is delivered in person that I'll be able to hand out business cards.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe I should have my email address and phone information directly on the slide for those that prefer not to use a QR code.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Thank you for that. One last comment from Quisi saying some contractors game the system. They bid low and go back for change orders.
That's right. So that's why it's important for another perspective to collect the right information at the time of bidding so that information can be reviewed to determine whether or not there is a situation where there's low ball bidding and potentially having that bidder disqualified before they're even given the chance to be awarded the contract. Now, if they do bid low, they're kind of, cutting off their nose to spite their face when you get into the post-award situation where the intent is to do award-based modifications. Because if you bid low and there's a change in a requirement that comes up later, keep in mind that, your bid data is what's going to be used to negotiate that amendment. The only way a contractor should be able to go back for a change order is identify what the change in requirement is, and then we can go from there. As opposed to just requesting a change order because they didn't bid enough money to do the work. They should be able to specifically identify where is the issue with the requirements as opposed to the issue with their resourcing and costing and pricing.
Mm. Mm.
So
Okay.
with a proper evaluation, using this type of detailed bid information, it's very difficult to game the system.
Perfect. Perfect. I don't believe we've gotten any more comments. Thank you very much, Agnes, for this very informative webinar. I'm looking forward to um, future opportunities to learn from you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.